Welcome back, my friends, to TFT Hyper Roll with Autarch, and it is time for set 14. And this will be the Hyper Roll breakdown that should be able to get you through, I would guess, the entire set. This video is going to be broken down into a bunch of different parts. We're in the introduction, then I'm going to do all these different builds, then at the very end, for long timers, will be my opinion of the set. That's really just for them, but let's talk about what makes Hyper Roll different if you're new to the game or if you just haven't played it in a while. First off, there's no interest, so there isn't particularly a reason to hold on to gold unless you have a particular rolling strategy. I will go through that in the specific builds. Also, you're going to go to stage 10 if you make it to the end, so you want to think in terms of teams of 10. Most regular builds are 8, 9 that they kind of think of. Here you have to think of what combinations make up good 10 packs of teams. Finally, the reason I started doing only one of these a season is mainly because Hyper Roll doesn't really get impacted nearly as much by the patches, and that's because of the teams of 10 and the fact that little changes don't really change what I'm doing here, which is trying to set up teams that are most likely to get you into the top 4. It's not always about going for a win, it's just about consistent climbing. And these are the ones I've worked through the PvE over the last 2 weeks, tested them multiple times to see what was giving me the best chance of actually getting into the top 4. Now, with that all said, let's get into the first build, which I call VR. And the V stands for Vanguard and the R for Rapidfire. Why this particular combination? It's because you can also work in just a little bit of BoomBots along with it. Now let me say something about this build. It's incredibly consistent. I consistently got between 2nd place and 5th place. Most of the time in the top 4, I'd say 95% of the time in the top 4 when using this build. However, it does not win. Have never won strictly staying with this build. And here's the frustrating part. You will often have games like this where you are sitting unbeaten, getting into the top 4. But the problem is that there simply isn't enough 4s and there are no 5 costs in the build at all. So once everyone else starts getting the 4 and 5 costs, you're going to start falling off. In this case, we end up winning, but I tell you, this game that you're looking at that looks like it's a sure thing, yeah, it's gonna be a 2nd place finish. And I'm showing this to you first because it's the most consistent. If you just want to climb, you can likely force this every single time. And what you want to do is just use the 4 rapid fires except for Kindred. She's really not going to fit into it. Your Vanguards, you're going to take your 6th highest. Make sure you hold on to Skarner because Skarner will be that little piece of BoomBot that will give you just that little extra bit of damage early. Itemize Kog'Maw to the hilt, hopefully with something like Deathblade. If you can get Rageblade, that's going to be key. For augments, there are some obvious ones that are specific to Vanguard and some that are specific to Rapidfire, but I happen to like this next one, Clockwork Accelerator, a lot, and that's because your frontline's going to hold for a long time, so you're likely to get a lot of additional attack speed out of it. The reason you want to get all this on Kog'Maw is the way BoomBots work is it's every 400 damage, they do that little bit of additional damage. So the faster Kog'Maw's attacking with a lot of power, the more BoomBots are going out that are going to ultimately knock down the opposing team. Once you get Zeri, you can move your Kog'Maw items over to her. That will just work for you because she's going to create a bunch of copies of herself that will do tons of damage against the other team. If you want to try and get fancy, once you get into the top 4, you can try pivoting away by moving into 5 costs, but to be honest, I have not found that it helps too much. You're really going to be relying on luck, but it'll consistently get you into the top 4. Now let's move on to our second build, which is actually one of my go-to builds for when I want to win, because it'll win really often. And I call it BM, which stands for Bastion and Marksman. And let me explain why this combination works really well and better than VR in terms of winning. Unlike VR, which only has 2 4 costs in the entire build, this has 3 4 costs and a 5 cost. And that's going to be Aphelios and Xayah, who are the 2 Marksman 4 costs, Sejuani, who is a Bastion 4 cost, and then Renekton, who is the Bastion 5 cost. To set up a win condition, you're going to have to 2-star everything I just mentioned, or else it probably isn't going to work out in terms of winning. But if you do 2-star all of them, yeah, you're pretty much guaranteed to win. I have yet to lose when I have all of them set up. Now, remember how I talked about earlier, while there is an interest in hyper roll, there is still sometimes rolling strategies. This is one of those builds. I like to hold my gold as long as possible. I will sacrifice health to hold my gold early on because I'm going to need it later when I want to get those 4 and 5s. And having a lot so you can reroll, yeah, that's going to be really helpful. Augment-wise, that Clockwork Accelerator is also excellent for this because Bastions, again, they're going to hold up the front line for a long time. There's a specific one for Marksman that I'll show you in a moment that will just allow you, it's basically an auto win if you get it. But in general, healing, things like that, Pandora's items are going to be good. Anything that can help you just build into the champs that you need. Now I want to take you quickly through sort of the perfect situation for this build. I generally went to it when I was getting frustrated with other builds that I was trying out and I was losing, and I was just like, okay, yeah, I want to win now. The slam at home, you have to do it. Augment is right there, flatline. It'll allow Marksman to execute people below 12%. Take it over anything else. That's about as close to a guaranteed win as I have seen in this game. For Bastions, you want to try to get Jax into the mix. I actually wasn't doing this early and I was still winning, but it becomes even easier if you get Jax, and I'll show you how that all works out in a moment. But you're going to want to get Jax, you're going to want to get Jhin. You're probably going to start with Kindred unless you get an early Jinx, but Kindred ends up falling off and you just don't need her in this build. It's better if you end up going with Jinx, Aphelios, Xayah, and Jhin as your 4 backliners, and then your Bastions will be basically everyone but Poppy. Much like Clockwork, Ascension is going to be great for this. Again, it's because your front line is going to hold things for a long time, you're going to end up getting that additional boost. Now, here is why I say you want Jhin, Jax, because once you get Sejuani, you're gonna get the Exotech item that you can, usually you get the one for Sejuani, you can put it on her, and then that's just going to seal your front line together. In a perfect world, your itemization looks something like this. On Xayah, Spear of Sojin, Last Whisper, Infinity Edge. On Aphelios, Rage Blade, Damage Amplifier, so Death Blade, Giant Slayer, things like that. Renekton, you're going to want to get healing items on like Bloodthirster, and this is why I say Flatline is just ridiculous, because yeah, it does stuff like that. So I would hold on to these first 2 builds as kind of the go-tos if other things don't happen. This one, if you get the right augments, just do it, you're going to win. But the other builds that are coming up are much more situational. It'll depend on what hack happens and also what your first augment is and what champs you get. But hold on to VR and BM, keep them in your wheelhouse because they will serve you well in your climb. Let's move on to the next build. This one is going to be dependent on a bunch of factors, but the first one is getting a decent street demon out of the NPC round. Getting an early Jinx or Rengar would be good. You can do it with Echo, Crazy Plant Lady, and Mundo. The second factor is going to be how the board is set up, and we'll get to that in a moment. The way street demons work is you get these painted hexes. Some of them are a little more prominent. Those are special ones. You need a decent configuration. It's not always the same. There's one that's like clumped in the middle. If you have that one, I would avoid this build. You want one that's spread out more like this so that you have more options as to where all the players are going to go. Now, I call this build Street Smarts, and that's because it combines the Street Demons with the Strategists. You'll want to get 7 Street Demons and 5 Strategists, which works out perfectly to a team of 10 because there are 2 who are crossovers, which is Echo and then Nico a little bit later on, who are going to be the tanks of the build. Mundo's going to come out later on for more powerful Street Demon units. Your key units for late in the game are going to be Brand and Samira. You will use the Crazy Plant Lady for your Brand items, and then you will use Jinx for your Samira items as holders. And you get plenty of magnetic removers in Hyper Roll, so you don't have to worry about selling people off to take the items off. And the reason the board configuration is so important is because of how strategists work. It buffs the first 2 rows and the back 2 rows for what they are. It'll make the first 2 rows stronger as tanks and the back 2 rows stronger for damage. And you want a nice configuration similar to this so you can put your power people where they need to be and not all clumped together so that you're susceptible to some of the later game antics. Your final formation will look something like this. You want Samira and Brand in the power corners, and then you want Echo and Nico on the front line in the power spots. There's usually 2 up front and then 2 in the back. Samira is going to be the cleanup queen in this game. Once she's up at 2 stars, she can take out almost an entire team. And this team was filled with 3-star champs, and we were still able to get through it thanks to the way this is set up. But again, this build is very particular as to whether you go for it or not. You need to have early Street Demon champs, and you need to have the right board setup. If either of those aren't matching, don't bother. For augments, you'll look for sort of the standard stuff. There are a couple of Street Demon specific augments you can pick up, but the most important thing I've found is the board configuration and getting the right champs at the right time. And since we ended this match against the next build, let's move into what I call CyberTech. And before we move into this build, let's have a trigger warning, because you're not going to like the way I pronounce one of the characters' names. There's a link to a video above for those who've had issues, but the most important thing before going into this build is getting a Vigor out of the NPC round. Your goal in every way possible is to get yourself to a gold 3-star Vigor and carry that through using a combination of Techie with Cyberboss. My top priority for augments is anything that will give me more rolls or the ability to get 2-star champs out of the shop. And there are some Cyberboss specific augments that are worth taking if you get them. But in general, I just want to get Vigor as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. My favorite item combination on Vigor is Blue Buff, Jeweled Gauntlet, and Nashter's Tooth, but you can also do Rabadon's Death Cap in place of Nashter's Tooth or the Jeweled Gauntlet if you want to go for more raw power. Be a little bit careful with itemizing Poppy. And the reason is I don't know quite what's triggering the system. However, sometimes I have found that when you start itemizing Poppy, even if Vigor's up at 3 stars, it may see Poppy at 2 stars as a stronger unit and promote them into the upgraded status rather than Vigor. And you really need the extra power coming from Vigor in order for this to work properly. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because the win condition is pretty extreme. You need to get to the 8 Techies, and that's going to require an emblem. The 4-6 will get you into the top 4. What you do is you just add in a Garen so that you will have a little extra in the build towards the end, because the 4-6 only gets you up to 9. But if you can get to the 8-4 with an emblem, then you're in a really good position to win, especially if you get all the key champs itemized, which are Ziggs, Vigor, Brand, and then Kabuko. Kabuko is going to be sort of the ultimate tank that holds things in place while Vigor just destroys them. But let's move on to the next build. Now, I had mentioned earlier how Flatline was an insta-win augment if you were going for Bastion and Marksman. There is also an insta-win augment for this particular build, although you can do it outside of this augment, and it's Chugbug. and that's going to make Gragas a lot stronger. Keep in mind, Gragas is also a 3 cost, so this is kind of a champion augment that revolves around a 3 cost. So if you see Chugbug, go ahead and grab it, and then you can go into the next build, which I call BBR, which stands for Bruisers, BoomBots, and Rapidfire. And the general strategy, if you get the Chugbug, is to just load up Gragas with some healing items, Hand of Justice, and Bloodthirster, things like that, to keep him up while the rest of your team destroys things. Having the BoomBots will just be adding additional damage, and Gragas is going to keep knocking them away from your backline, so it'll hold things in place while the rest of your team does their job. But let's say for a moment you don't get Chugbug, but you still want to go this build. It's very, very viable because it's fairly easy to get early BoomBots and early Bruisers. And if you do, they're going to do well really early. You want to build on a lot of speed to Kog'Maw. You want to build AP items onto Fiddlesticks. You can do something like a Bloodthirster on him, but I tend to find the AP items a little bit more effective. Augments like Big Friend, Glass Cannon, things like that are very good because, again, the BoomBots trigger based on the amount of damage that goes out. So if you're doing more damage from the backline, you're going to be doing more firing later. And Bruisers are going to have a lot of health, so giving them a health boost is definitely going to help. Once you can get Cho up to 2 stars, transfer all of your tank items over to Cho. He's going to scale just out of control. Also, the reason we have an R and bring in a Rapidfire is because BoomBots and Bruisers is only going to get you to a team of 9, and again, Hyper Roll, think teams of 10. So enhancing Kog'Maw's Rapidfire ability is going to be key, and you're going to keep Skarner in until you get Urgot at the end. But one of the fun things with this build is watching Cho just scale out of control throughout any particular single round. And generally, the win condition for this particular build is to get the 2-star Kabuko, the 2-star Cho, and then a 2-star Urgot, and you're pretty well off. However, I want to share the ending of a match I did this weekend because it went a little haywire in terms of what happened. And I have my win condition pretty much set up here, except that person at the top with 18 health, who has only lost 1 match early on, they're running a really strong Nitro team. And that we're going to do that build next, but when that gets rolling and is done, it's pretty much unbeatable except by a few conditions. And so with that in mind, I knew I was going to face them next. I had 2 champion duplicators, and so I went ahead and managed to get the 3-star Kabuko. And let's just show you what a 3-star Kabuko can do. And this was my first time seeing one, so I didn't know what to expect. And at this point, he's basically going to leave the board. And I was like, oh, where is he? Like, what's going on? And then, yeah, check out the damage. I don't think I've ever seen numbers like that before in TFT, but needless to say, once that player with 18 health realized what I had on my board, they just decided they were done. And it was GG for everyone, but since we just faced it, let's move on to the next build. Now this build is a lot of fun. It's not my favorite one, that'll come at the very end, but I will only attempt this under certain conditions. That's one of them, if we get the hack where 2-star units can appear in the shop. The second possible condition is if I end up with a prismatic ticket. That will be a good window for this. Finally, if you get this specific hack, don't even stop and think about it. You're going Nitro A.M.P. It's the only thing you can do at this point that would make any sense because it scales out of control, and being able to get shops that are tailored to it, yeah, you're gonna just win. As far as augments goes, anything that will get you more rolls or more money, anything that will allow you to keep re-rolling. So in this case, lack of anything, Caretaker's Alley, it'd be great if you happen to end up with a Shyvana, but if you don't, that's okay. Just start buying things up until you can get Shyvana and you can get your little Nitro out there. This is going to be key. Then your goal is to just roll like a madman until you can 3-star all of your champs. And again, with augments, just straight to whatever is going to allow you to build up your team. Team building. The more duplicators you can get, the better. With your item choices, if you see a champion duplicator, just take it. Your goal is to get to Godzilla as quickly as possible. And I can't stress to you how much nothing else matters except getting that what starts off as a little bomb dropper up to Godzilla, because that is then going to scale everything out of control. You want to 3-star as much as you can. Samira is your final AMP champ, and you will itemize her, but in many ways you kind of don't need it because everything else is just going to revolve around the fact that that creature can breathe them down with its flames of death. In reality, though, you do need some support for this. Put your AP items on Elise. She's going to be very, very strong. And since AMP Nitro combination is only 8 team members, you're going to need 2 more to fill out, which you can just do with 5 costs, or you can add a little more Strategist to the mix. And for the last build on this list, and this is actually my favorite build to do from the group that I've put here, but it's not forcible, so please don't do it, but I call it Stamp. And it is a combination of Strategist and AMP. And I don't see anyone else doing it, and it is absolutely sinister when you get it all together. Now, the problem with this build and why I say not to force it is because it requires a lot of high-cost units. Ziggs, who's a strategist, is a 4-cost. Nico, who's a strategist, is a 4-cost. Samira, the AMP, is a 5-cost. Annie, who's the AMP, is a 4-cost. So to get it to all come together, you need a lot of luck in place, and yeah, it's a little hit or miss, but again, when you hit it, it just works really well. So the trick to playing this really is to itemize the units that you can get. So LeBlanc, give all of your AP items to, these will transfer over to Annie later, and Nefari, give your AD items to, these are going to transfer over to Samira. Get your tank items onto Echo, they're going to transfer over to Nico, and usually if you just then add in a couple of high-cost champions to wherever position they belong in, it will help get you through because Strategist will make them stronger if they're frontline and stronger if they're backline. Augment-wise, I'm looking for power, things that will enhance the team. So if you can get something that'll give you additional items, that's great. Or in this case, when I get offered a golden egg, I'll take that chance because I feel like this can hold on long enough to get all the way through. Anytime you have a chance to add an AMP or a strategist, get them in the game, but hold on to those high-cost filler units because ultimately getting to the full 5 AMP, 5 strategists is going to be a team of 9, so you're going to have one additional champion at the end anyway. And the reason I like building this comp so much is that it's so surprising. There's nothing on your team that really looks like it's going to just dominate, but somehow you just end up pulling wins out of nowhere. And a fun little bonus to this comp is because you have Samira, Echo, and Nico, you're also going to get Street Demon. So you're going to be able to buff your champs a little bit more. In this case, the board positioning doesn't matter. Unlike the Street Smarts build I said earlier where I wouldn't do it unless I had a really good board position, with this particular comp, I'm pretty willing to go with any board position as long as I get my 4 main power champs onto the special squares, which is going to be Samira, Annie, Echo, and Nico. And those ones that are also Street Demons are going to get extra bonus, and Annie just becomes ridiculously strong once you get to the 5 AMP. You can see you just start tearing through opposing teams. Finishing it off with Viego is pretty effective because that will trigger the Golden Ox, or sometimes I like bringing in Zac just for that extra tankiness up front. In this case, because we had a Tactician's Crown, we're able to bring in both of them, which really leaves the conclusion of the game not too much mystery, as you can see how many champs are left after that round, and this is already into the top 4. So this was my favorite build, and mainly because I didn't see another single person playing it the entire time I was going through the PvE. I don't know if people didn't think of it or just didn't see it as viable because of all the high-cost champs, but this is something you can pivot into if you keep everything going. In this particular game, I had won that, then checked in on the other board, won that one with the Ghost team, and yeah, it was GG for everyone. And that's the end of the build portion of the video. It's time for the second trigger warning, because in this next part, I'm going to talk about set 14 in general and my opinion on it. And if you are a long watcher of the channel, you probably know, or if you're eagle-eyed and saw my name change from Autarch to NOTtarch during the PBE, yeah, that kind of says it. And in the background, I'll show I'll call it a bonus build, but not really. It's one I was working on during the PBE, but I did not find consistent enough, and that was Anima Squad Slayer. It kind of worked, but was not nearly consistent enough for me to consider it worth bringing into this. The one thing I will say is if you do end up using Anima Squad and you get a roar, make sure you put a 2-starred 5 cost in that left side. But that aside, yeah, set 14 hack. You know how I feel about RNG, and this set feels like it took it to a whole new level beyond where I've seen it before. Because not only do you have fixed points of RNG and what I consider insta-win augments, and in this case insta-win hacks, because there are certain starts you can get in this game that just dictate do this build and you're guaranteed top 4. Chugbug, you're guaranteed top 4. Flatline, you're guaranteed top 4. There's a whole lot of them that just guarantee you top 4 unless you just get so ridiculously unlucky that you don't have a chance. But now on top of that, you have portions of the game where you get a bunch of Pandora's items, because they'll have hacked items that come in and then change every round. And those who have been with me since I started making videos in around set 5 know how I feel about the RNG elements. For a while, they were adding them and retracting them set to set, and I think ultimately they found that the larger portion of the player base, especially the ones who are rolling for those idiotic finisher skins, are more prone to liking RNG-based elements in the game, and that's just not me. The RNG elements I was fine with was things like this, picking up a gold 3-star Renekton and being able to throw it in, because there was a certain amount of planning. I had to have the right board set up in order to make that happen. But the RNG where you suddenly get just the right augment that's going to make this just an easy win, that not so much, and it's kind of been like that for the last few sets. So sorry to say I won't be playing the regular, but I will be doing a Talker's trial video, and if they come out with Chaos Mode, I'll do more there. But I hope you enjoyed this video and it helps you on your climb, and as always, have an absolutely awesome day.